All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Football Podcast. They'll be doing my preview and prediction for the 2022 ACC Championship game between Clemson and North Carolina. Tigers, 7.5-point favorites. 63.5 is the over-under. 8 p.m. Eastern Time on ABC. Bank of America Stadium is the site of this one in Charlotte, North Carolina. Clemson leads the all-time series 38-19-1, and they've won the last four. Looking at the Clemson offense, it's been a much better unit than it was a season ago, but, it still had their inconsistencies. You look at the Notre Dame game, 281 total yards of offense, 336 against South Carolina. It's been a very, very bumpy road for Clemson this year. I would say they haven't exactly been great at one thing in particular. DJ Uiagalelei, very inconsistent quarterback, coming off a game against SC where he was terrible, 8 of 29. That's only a 27% completion rate, 99 yards. A big bulk of that came off a pass play to Bo Collins that now, he's injured now. He's out for the year. It's a big loss for the receiving core. Antonio Williams, as a freshman, always stepped up, 50 grabs, 523 yards, and 4 touchdowns, all team highs. He's actually second on the team in touchdowns to Collins. But this is a team that's got some good pass catchers. Joseph Nagata, Davis Allen at tight end, Jake Burringstool at tight end as well. Depth has really started to hit, though. E.J. Williams has not been involved. Collins, of course, now he's injured. They have a pretty respectable receiving core, and I think the chemistry has certainly went up compared to last year. I think that area is certainly elevated, but still very much an inconsistent passing attack, not just due to the quarterback, but the pass catchers as well. The offensive line outside of Jordan McFadden, they haven't really had too much of a great year up front. Will Putnam at center, he's had a respectable season, I would say. I think pass protection certainly early on in the year was definitely improved, but as time has went on, not so much. Will Shipley, 186 carries, 1,092 yards, 14 touchdowns. He tends to spark a big play every game it seems on the ground. 195 yards receiving. He's a capable pass catcher. And, of course, he's their kick returner as well with 11 returns on the season. Phil Maffa, 466 yards and 3 touchdowns. Kobe Pace, he's been injured. I think he's going to return for this one. This is just an offense that's been very strange. They're not great in any particular area. Cade Klubnik, of course, he was given the go in the Syracuse game at home many weeks ago. And he was able to assist a little bit, not too much. DJ, though, they got confidence in him still. I don't really know why. He certainly has definitely, I'd say, played himself out of this position, especially over the last month after he really started the year off. The first half of the season, I'd say, very well. Since the Syracuse game, it's just been downhill for him. It's just, not been pretty one bit. This offense, though, I do think that they have a pretty good edge against a pretty poor UNC defense. I expect to see a healthy dose of Will Shipley. DJ's legs, 545 yards and 7 touchdowns. He gets about 12 touches a game. His bigger frame. He did lose a lot of weight this year, but he's still a bigger quarterback. That he's got, impressive speed as well. So, this is a guy that's always falling forward for yards, and his legs are going to be used, I think, heavily in this one. But I think it's going to be the running back show of Shipley, Maffa, and Pace. If those guys are all healthy, then that's going to be the way to go in this game. And I do think they'll be able to spark some big passing plays downfield. Individual talent here, I think, is definitely going to reign supreme over a UNC secondary. It's just been incredibly poor. So Clemson's offense, solid unit, 34 points per game is a very impressive mark, especially where they were a season ago, but top to bottom, nothing too crazy. Looking at the UNC offense, they're coming off of 2 interesting performances. They were red hot going into that Georgia Tech game. They scored 17 points right off the bat. That's pretty much it. They ended the game 365 yards. Went to multiple overtimes against Tennessee State. Only had 351 in that one on 89 plays, 3.9 yards per play. And I did figure they would struggle against an NC State defense that's really good, even before the Georgia Tech game. But after the performance against the Yellow Jackets, you definitely saw it coming. This is an offense looking to find its stride again. Drake May's been terrific, 6'5", 220, 68% completion rate, 3,847 yards, 35 touchdowns, 5 picks, 321 yards per game. He also ran for 629 and 6 touchdowns. He's filled that Sam Howell role perfectly. I was wondering how they would replace Sam Howell's production, not just as a passer, but as a runner, and they've called the exact same offense. Phil Longo, has been able to identify the strengths of Drake May's game, and they've put them to good use. The backfield, they average about 160 yards per game rushing. Elijah Green's really started to take over that lead role, 443 yards, 8 touchdowns on the year. Caleb Hood, of course, he was rolled out for the year a couple games ago. Twice now over the last month, Elijah Green has hit 20-plus carries, though, so he's certainly the lead guy in the backfield. Amarian Hampton gets involved still. Looking at the receiving core, though, it's not very deep. But Josh Downs, he's elite, especially in the slot. He's just tough to cover. 83 grabs, 929 yards, 11 touchdowns. Looking to break 1,000-yard mark in this one. Antonio Green, 745 and 7 touchdowns. He's a guy that's missed a handful of games this season, but he was big in his return against NC State. He grabbed 67 yards and a score. Bryson Nesbitt, one of the better tight ends in the country, 15 yards per catch on 30 receptions. That's 459 and 3 touchdowns as well. J.J. Jones, he's got 20-plus grabs, as does another tight end, Kamari Morales. So they dish it out to a handful of guys. They're not incredibly deep at pass catcher. Kobe Paysor, I haven't really heard much of his name as of late. But in the early part of the season, he was a guy that stepped up when they needed him to. So, that's another respectable pass catcher for them. Very good UNC offense. The offensive line was completely terrible a season ago, and I think they're better than they were last year. Asim Richards, as a pass blocker, I think he's been very good this year, especially with all the pass blocking snaps they do. But for the most part, this is an offensive line. They're not really good. They give up a lot of sacks, a lot of negative plays. Drake May in this explosive offense, though, they produce 37 points per contest, so they certainly make up for it with their explosiveness and the skill that they do have on this unit. Top to bottom, though, kind of like Clemson. They're really, at times it's really good, but at times it's really poor, like the last 2 weeks. So coming into this game against the Clemson defense that's been all over the place this year, not really sure what to expect. I do think this is a big spot for a young freshman quarterback, though, going against one of the most talented defenses he'll see all year long. I anticipate they may struggle. I do think they'll hit that 400-yard mark again, but that's anticipated. How many points will they put up? How many explosive plays will they generate? Remains to be seen, especially with this offensive line facing a tough defensive front. Looking at the Clemson defense, they've been good, but not great. 21 points per game allowed this year. Not giving up too many yards on a per-game basis, 327 of those. But they've just not been as dominant as we figured. Brett Venables departs, and I think that has a little bit to do with it. But, Miles Murphy, 11 TFL. KJ Henry, 9 TFL. They've been great off the edge. Jeremiah Trotter, he's been elite. Going to be a first-team All-American, I would imagine. 71 tackles, 2 picks, 3.5 sacks. He also has 9 tackles for loss, 5 pass breakups. He's been great as a run stopper. He's been great in coverage. Jeremiah Trotter having an exceptional season this year in the middle of that defense. Barrett Carter, he's, the same guys. These two guys were recruited right next to each other in terms of ranking. 2 redshirt freshmen that are getting involved this year. Carter hasn't had as strong of a year, but he's still been impressive. This run defense has had some issues. The secondary, of course, they just got bodied against South Carolina, gave up numerous big plays. And it's kind of been the theme this year is they've been unable to cover. I do want to talk about the run defense real quick, though. They did give up 263 against Notre Dame. They bounced back against Miami, only 30 yards, and 55 against South Carolina. So for the most part, I still think this is a pretty dominant presence on the defensive line. They did struggle against Florida State, especially on that left side of the Seminoles, was having their way with them. North Carolina does not possess that. They do not have a very impressive offensive line. They do not have guys that are people movers by any means. So I think this is a big opportunity for this D-line to really get unleashed here. Already talked about Henry, Murphy, but Brian Bresee not having exactly the greatest of seasons, but Tyler Davis at defensive tackle as well, Rook Ohoro. They have plenty of size, plenty of depth, guys that are going to get involved. I think this is a big-time opportunity for this unit to really step up and take over this game. Again, they've been terrific against the run, only 36 sacks. They certainly, that's not a bad number by any means, but they were unable to really generate much of that against Notre Dame because they were getting bodied on the ground so much. But they had 4 sacks against South Carolina, and their deep pass defense still gave up, almost 400 yards, plenty of big plays in that one. Safety, RJ Minkins, he's been their best coverage defender, I would say. Nate Wiggins does have 10 pass breakups. He's been very inconsistent. You look all the way back to that Wake Forest game where Wiggins, especially, they really struggled against the pass. They did play too bad against Florida State. They did give up 250-plus yards in that one. This is a secondary, though. This seems when they play talented passing attacks, they certainly have struggles, and that's what they're facing on Saturday in Notre Dame. I really don't know how they're going to cover Josh Downs in the slot. I do think that this defense, of course, has great individual players, especially in the front 7. But I'm very concerned because they're not great. I do think they've been pretty exceptional in the defensive line. I do think they're going to really tee off here in this one. But I'm pretty concerned about their secondary. I don't know how they're going to match up in man-to-man coverage. That's something they played a lot, especially all the way back in the Wake Forest game. They're just getting torn apart. And, same thing against South Carolina. They could not cover a horse. So Clemson defense, good, not great. Leads you to the North Carolina defense, a unit that's just, horrible. 30 points per game allowed, 443 yards per contest. They get completely annihilated on the ground. They're not great through the air, 118th in college football in that category. They don't have any good defensive backs, it seems like. These guys have just been very, very poor on the back end, and I hate to say that because I really thought that this would be a unit that really, could have some resurgence with the talent they had in Storm Dunk and Tony Grimes. And those guys have just not been great for Gene Chizik this year. He figured he would be able to come in year one and start to gel that talent together like he did many years ago. It's not been the case. One guy that certainly lived up to the expectations was Cedric Gray, 131 tackles in the middle. Of course, he's forced to make a lot of tackles of, the running lane not getting clogged. Power Echols, he also has 94 tackles. So, those are great tackle numbers, but when you know the full story, it's not as impressive because these guys cannot stop the run one bit. They did pretty well against NC State, a running attack that's really not been too great themselves this year. You look at early in the year, though, they gave up 230-plus yards in 3 straight games, gave up almost 300 to Duke. These are games they all won, though, besides the Notre Dame game. They've been giving up a lot of yards. Offense has been able to outscore the opposition for the most part. It's just not a good defense, though. I do think that Cameron Rucker is their best defensive lineman. Noah Taylor, he's only played in 8 games. He has 3.5 sacks this year. He's out for the year, of course. And Rucker right behind him has 2.5 with 4 more games played. No one's able to pass him over. They don't have any pass rush presence, only 16 sacks on the year. You got your linebackers and some DBs that have some sack numbers, but nobody on the defensive front has stepped up. Miles Murphy's had a pretty poor season. He's not been great like you figured he would be. Just top to bottom, not a great defense. I do think they're going to struggle a good bit against the run in this one. I do think they still have talented DBs that can match up with these talented pass catchers, but the theme this year is they've just not been good one bit. Cedric Gray's going to have to lead the way immensely. DeAndre Boykins, he's been good as a run defender from his cornerback position. Don Chapman as well at safety. But for the most part, this is just a defense that's not good. They do have, a handful of good individual players, but far and few for North Carolina. Looking at team comparisons, at quarterback, UNC gets the clear edge. Drake May is much better than DJ Uyunglele at running back. UNC, they're pretty deep, but I think Clemson's led by Will Shipley. Phil Moffa's a respectable number 2, and Pace is going to be back, so I'm going to give them the edge there. Wide receiver, North Carolina, give them the edge there. Clemson, they're starting to battle some injuries. Josh Downs, he's obviously one of the nation's best at his position. And Tony Williams has been a big, producer for Clemson, but I'm going to give the edge to the Tar Heels. The rest of it goes to the Tigers' offensive line. Neither team's really great, but I do think Clemson has a clear edge there, defensive line-wise. That's, clear contest. 10 times out of 10, you'll take it that defensive line over North Carolina's. Not much of a discussion there. Linebacker, I love Cedric Gray, but I think Jeremiah Schroeder has had a much better season than Gray. If you look at production, you'd say otherwise, but they've both had exceptional seasons, so no disrespect there. But as a group, as a whole, Clemson, they're going to get the edge there. And then the secondary, I do think that they've certainly had their struggles, but North Carolina, one of the worst secondaries in the country, again, 118th against the pass. They've just been horrible defending the passing attacks. Looking at the keys to the game, the final thoughts and prediction on this one. Clemson, I think they need to establish the ground and pound, get some pressure on the interior with their defensive line, make Drake May forced out of the pocket. Of course, he's dangerous with his legs, but they got good closing speed from this defense. They should be able to bottle up May more often than not. UNC got to clog the run lanes, and then they got to make most of every possession. You don't got to score necessarily on every possession. That'd be nice, but if you can just flip field a little bit, that's certainly going to help you tremendously in this one. Prediction, I'm going to take Clemson 38-28. This is a pretty interesting game. No one really seems to care about it anymore. Don't blame them. UNC coming off 2 losses. Clemson coming off another loss. They have 2 of them now on the year. At 10-2, their playoff hopes are shot. UNC, though, I do not believe they will clog those run lanes like I think that the biggest key for their defense is. I think that's going to be a big field day on the ground for Clemson. Drake May and this talented offense, they will keep them in the game, but I do think this will be a big bounce-back game for the Tigers overall. And I just think their D-line is going to tee off on a poor offensive front. It's going to be the difference maker. They'll still put up their points, though. It's kind of a stretch at this point, considering how poor they've been the last 2 weeks. But I'm going to go 38-28, pretty conservative score. Clemson to cover behind a dominant rushing attack. So that's going to be it for today's episode, guys. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.